At Thanksgiving dinner, my daughter-in-law left a small folded card on the table in front of my plate, and that was the moment I realized I was no longer a guest in my own family's home. The dining room smelled like roasted turkey, cinnamon, and the sweet potatoes I had been making the same way for more than 30 years, the way my husband liked them, the way my son used to beg for when he was a boy. But that night the air felt colder than it should have for a house full of people. I remember the exact sound the chair made when I sat down, a soft scrape against the hardwood floor Daniel had installed himself 15 years ago, back when he still asked my opinion about everything. Rachel was already seated, perfectly dressed as always, her hair pinned neatly, her smile polite but distant, the kind of smile that never quite reached her eyes. She slid the card across the table toward my place without looking at me, like it was just another napkin, just another fork, just another thing that didn't matter. I thought it was a place card at first, maybe something festive, something for the holiday, because Rachel liked things to look perfect when other people were around. But when I picked it up, the paper felt heavier than it should have, thick and stiff like something official. On the front, written in neat black ink, were two words, family trip. I turned it over slowly, not wanting to assume anything, not wanting to let my mind go where it was already starting to go, and that was when I saw the rest of the message. We'll be gone for a week. Please clean the house while we're away. For a moment, I thought I had read it wrong. I even held the card closer to the light above the table, the same light fixture my husband had picked out at Home Depot one Saturday morning, joking that we needed something bright enough so he could see what he was eating. My hands didn't shake. I remember that clearly. They didn't shake at all. I just kept looking at the words, reading them again and again, as if they might change if I gave them enough time. Across from me, Rachel was pouring herself a glass of wine like nothing unusual had happened. Like she hadn't just handed me a note that turned me from mother to housekeeper in the middle of Thanksgiving dinner. Daniel cleared his throat and reached for the gravy, avoiding my eyes the way he had been doing more and more lately, the way people do when they know something is wrong but they don't want to be the one to say it out loud. No one explained the card. No one laughed and said it was a joke. No one even asked if I had read it. The only sound in the room for a few seconds was the clink of silverware and the low hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I folded the card carefully, the same way I used to fold Daniel's school permission slips when he was a kid, and placed it next to my plate. Turkey looks good, I said, because after 68 years of life, you learn that sometimes the quietest moment is the one that tells you the most. Rachel smiled at that, finally looking at me, and for just a second I saw something in her expression I hadn't noticed before, not anger, not even dislike, but certainty, the kind of certainty people have when they believe the house, the table, the whole life sitting in front of them already belongs to them. I passed the cranberry sauce to Daniel, just like I always did, and he took it without meeting my eyes, his fingers brushing mine for a split second before pulling away. It was such a small thing, so small anyone else at the table might not have noticed it, but I did. Mothers notice those things. We always do. I looked around the dining room then, at the walls my husband and I had painted ourselves, at the cabinet that still held the china we bought on clearance the year Daniel started college, at the window over the sink where I used to stand every morning with my coffee, believing this house would always be the place my family came back to. The card was still sitting beside my plate, quiet, polite, perfectly written, and somehow louder than anything anyone had said all night. I picked up my fork, took a bite of turkey, and nodded like everything was normal, because if there is one thing life teaches a woman my age, it's that the moment people start treating you like you don't belong, the smartest thing you can do is stay very still and watch carefully, because the ones who think you're powerless are usually the ones who forget whose name is still on the front door. After dinner that night, I stayed in the kitchen longer than anyone else, even after the plates were cleared and the dishwasher was running, because the kitchen had always been the one place in the house where I knew exactly what to do without being told. I wiped the counter slowly, the same way I had done thousands of times before, moving the sponge in small circles across the granite Daniel insisted on installing when he and Rachel moved in 3 years ago, back when he said it would make things easier for all of us if we lived together. At the time, I believed him. I believed that sharing the house meant sharing a life, not giving one up piece by piece until there was nothing left that felt like mine. The card was still in my pocket, folded twice now, the edges pressing against my hand every time I reached for something. like a reminder I could not ignore even if I wanted to. Rachel and Daniel had gone upstairs not long after dessert, saying they needed to pack for their flight in the morning. Their voices casual, their footsteps light, as if the note she had given me was the most normal thing in the world. I stood at the sink and watched the reflection in the dark window above it, my own face looking back at me older than I remembered, the lines around my mouth deeper, my hair more gray than silver under the kitchen lights. This house used to feel different at night. When my husband was alive, the evenings were full of small sounds that made the place feel warm, the television in the living room, the creak of the stairs, the way he would open the refrigerator even when he was not hungry, just to see what was inside. After he passed away, the silence changed. It became heavier, like the air itself was waiting for something to happen. For a while, Daniel tried to fill that silence. He came over more often, brought groceries, fixed things that did not need fixing, and when he suggested that he and Rachel move in, he said it would be temporary, just until we all figured out what came next. I remember the exact words he used. He said, "Mom, this is still your house. We are just helping." I believed that too. I believed it when Rachel started reorganizing the cabinets, because she said it would make cooking easier. I believed it when she changed the guest room into an office because she worked from home and needed the space. I believed it when the mail started coming with both of their names on it, lined up neatly under mine, like the order did not matter. But things change slowly in a house, so slowly you do not notice at first. The first time I felt it was last winter, when I came downstairs one morning and found the locks on the back door had been replaced. Daniel told me it was for security, that the old ones were worn out, and I nodded like that made sense, even though no one had asked me before changing anything in this house for more than 30 years. Then there was the garage code, the one I had used every day since we moved in, suddenly not working. Rachel said the system had reset itself, and she gave me a new number, smiling like she was doing me a favor. Little things like that, one after another, small enough to ignore, easy enough to explain, until the day you realize you are asking permission in a place where you used to make the rules. I turned off the kitchen light and stood there for a moment in the dark, listening to the house settle the way old houses do at night, the soft ticking sounds in the walls, the hum of the heater kicking on, the faint vibration of footsteps upstairs where Daniel and Rachel were getting ready for their trip. Family trip, the card had said, like it was something I was supposed to understand without asking questions. Clean the house while we are away, like I had been waiting all my life for instructions. I walked to the hallway table where we kept the spare keys, the same wooden table my husband built in the garage one summer when Daniel was still in high school, and I ran my fingers across the surface, feeling the small scratches and dents that had been there. For years, I did not cry. I did not even feel angry. What I felt was something quieter than that, something colder, the kind of feeling that comes when you finally stop wondering whether things will go back to the way they were and start realizing that they never will. I took the card out of my pocket again, unfolded it, and read the words one more time under the dim light in the hallway, then folded it carefully and set it on the table next to the keys, because for the first time since my husband died, I had the strange, steady feeling that the house was not the only thing in my life that was about to be cleaned out. I woke up earlier than usual the next morning, long before I heard the sound of Rachel's suitcase rolling across the floor upstairs, and for a few seconds I forgot about the card, forgot about the trip, forgot about the way the house had felt the night before, the way a place can suddenly seem unfamiliar even when every piece of furniture is exactly where it has always been. The clock on the nightstand read 5:42, the same digital clock my husband bought at a hardware store more than 10 years ago, because he said he liked the numbers big enough to read without his glasses. I lay there for a moment listening to the quiet, the kind of quiet that only exists early in the morning, before anyone starts moving around, before the day has a chance to remind you of the things you would rather not think about. Then I got up, put on my robe, and went downstairs to the kitchen, following the same routine I had followed for decades without ever having to think about it. The coffee maker was exactly where I left it, the mug still hanging on the hooks under the cabinet, the small jar of sugar pushed slightly to the side the way my husband used to leave it after making his own cup. I poured the coffee slowly and stood by the sink while it brewed, looking out the window at the backyard, at the fence Daniel built the summer he turned 21, back when he still asked me if the boards looked straight enough. For a long time, mornings were the easiest part of the day, Because mornings did not ask questions. Mornings did not remind you who was in charge and who was not. But that morning felt different, like the house was waiting for something. The same feeling I had the night before when I turned off the lights. I took my coffee to the dining room and sat at the end of the table, the same seat I had always taken. The one my husband used to joke was the captain's chair, because from there I could see everyone at once. The folded card was still on the hallway table where I left it, just visible from where I sat. The white paper standing out against the dark wood like it did not belong there. I told myself not to look at it again, but my eyes kept drifting back to it anyway, the way they do when you know something has changed and you are trying to figure out when it really started. It had not started with the card. I knew that now. It had started months ago, maybe longer, back when Rachel first began talking about how expensive the house was to maintain, how the utilities were higher than they should be, how a place this size was too much for one person. She always said it in a careful voice, like she was concerned, like she was trying to help, but every time she said it she looked at Daniel, not at me, and Daniel would nod the way he does when he wants to agree without actually saying anything. Then there were the conversations that stopped when I walked into the room, the ones that ended with Rachel saying, "We will talk about it later," and Daniel pretending not to notice that I had heard. A few weeks ago, I came home from the grocery store and found two men in the living room measuring the windows, talking about replacement costs, and Rachel told me they were just getting estimates in case we ever decided to remodel. She used that word a lot. We should fix this. We should change that. We might sell someday. I never knew when we started meaning them instead of all of us. The coffee had gone cold in my hands before I realized I had not taken a sip. I stood up, walked to the sink, and poured it out. Watching the dark liquid disappear down the drain, the sound echoing slightly in the quiet kitchen. Upstairs, I heard the bedroom door close and the low murmur of Rachel's voice, followed by Daniel's heavier footsteps crossing the floor, and for a moment I just stood there with my hand on the edge of the counter, listening. The way you listen when you know something important is happening, but no one has invited you to be part of it. I looked toward the hallway again, at the small table where the card was still lying next to the spare keys, and I felt that same steady, cold feeling I had felt the night before. The feeling that the house was not the only thing being prepared for change, and that whatever Daniel and Rachel thought was going to happen while they were gone, it was not going to happen the way they expected. I did not say anything while they were getting ready to leave, and no one asked me if I wanted to come along, which somehow made everything feel more honest than if they had pretended to include me. Rachel walked through the kitchen with her coat already on, checking something on her phone, talking about flight times and hotel reservations like the house behind her was already part of the past. Daniel grabbed his keys from the hallway table, right next to the folded card, and for a moment his hand stopped there, like he remembered something, but he did not pick it up, and he did not look at me. He just slid the keys into his pocket and said they would be back in a week, maybe a little longer if the weather stayed nice. I nodded and told him to have a good trip, the same way I used to tell him to drive safe when he was a teenager borrowing the car. The same calm voice, the same small smile, even though the feeling in my chest was nothing like those days. When the front door closed, the sound echoed through the house louder than it should have, and the silence that followed felt different from the quiet of early morning or late night. This silence felt like a room that had been emptied out too quickly, like something important had been taken without anyone saying it out loud. I stood in the hallway. For a long time after their car pulled out of the driveway, looking at the table where the card was still lying, next to the spare keys and the small wooden bowl my husband used to drop his change into every evening. For a moment, I thought about throwing the card away, just picking it up and tearing it in half and dropping it in the trash like it did not matter, but my hand stopped before I touched it, because the truth was that the card did matter. It mattered more than anything Rachel had ever said to my face, because it was the first time she had not bothered to pretend. I picked it up again, unfolded it slowly, and read the words one more time, not because I needed to see them, but because I wanted to remember exactly how they looked, exactly how they felt in my hand, the weight of the paper, the neat handwriting, the way the message sounded less like a request and more like instructions left for someone who worked there. Clean the house while we are away. I carried the card into the living room and sat down in my husband's chair without thinking. The old brown recliner he refused to replace even when the leather started cracking along the arms. From that chair, you could see almost the whole first floor, the staircase, the front door, the dining room table, the hallway where the bedrooms were, Every corner of the place we spent most of our lives paying for one paycheck at a time. When we bought this house, Daniel was 9 years old, and the first thing he did was run from room to room, counting how many windows there were, like the number of windows meant something important. My husband laughed and told him every window was another thing we would have to clean, but he said it like he was proud of it, proud that we finally had something big enough to take care of. We painted the walls ourselves that first summer, the three of us standing on ladders in the heat with the radio playing in the kitchen, arguing about colors and laughing when the paint dripped on the floor. I remember the day we signed the papers, the way my husband squeezed my hand in the parking lot and said, "This is it, Maggie. This one is ours." He said it like a promise, like something that could not be taken back once it was said. Years later, when Daniel got married, we stood in this same living room after everyone left, and my husband told me not to worry about anything changing. He said families grow, that was all, and that no matter what happened, the house would always be mine as long as I wanted it. He was very clear about that. He even joked that the only way anyone would get him out of this place was feet first, and I told him not to talk like that, because I never liked hearing things that sounded too final. After he passed, I held on to those words more than I realized, like they were part of the foundation of the house itself, something solid under everything else. Sitting there in his chair with the card in my hand, I looked around the room slowly, at the pictures on the wall, at the marks on the floor where furniture had been moved over the years, at the window where the afternoon light always came in just right, and for the first time since he died, I asked myself a question I should have asked a long time ago. Not whether the house had changed, not whether Daniel had changed, but whether I had been the only one who believed that promises made in this room were meant to last forever. I did not move from the chair for a long time after that, just sitting there with the card in my hand, listening to the quiet settle deeper into the walls, the kind of quiet that makes every small sound seem louder than it really is. Eventually I stood up, folded the card again, and placed it on the coffee table in front of me, lining it up with the edge without thinking, the same habit I had when Daniel was young and I wanted everything in the house to feel orderly, like if the small things stayed in place then the bigger things would too. I told myself I was being dramatic, that families go through changes, that people say things they do not mean, but the truth was that the feeling in my chest would not go away, and it was not sadness anymore. It was something sharper than that. Something that made me want to understand exactly when the ground under my feet had started to shift. Around noon, the phone rang, the old landline in the kitchen that I still kept even though Daniel said nobody used those anymore. The sound startled me because the house had been so quiet all morning that I had almost forgotten what it was like to hear it. I picked up on the second ring, expecting a wrong number or maybe one of those calls about insurance. But when I said hello, the voice on the other end paused for a second before speaking, like the person was not sure how to begin. It was Linda Parker, my neighbor from 2 houses down. The same Linda who used to bring over casseroles after my husband passed. The same Linda who always seemed to notice things before anyone else did. She asked if Daniel and Rachel had already left for their trip, and when I told her they had, she was quiet again, long enough that I could hear the faint sound of a television in the background on her end. Finally, she said she hoped I would not mind her asking something, and her voice had that careful tone people use when they think the answer might hurt. She said she had seen a real estate agent's car in my driveway last week when I was out, and she wondered if we were thinking about selling the house. For a moment, I did not understand the question. The words did not seem to fit with anything I knew, and I told her she must have the wrong house, that nobody had mentioned anything to me about selling. Linda did not argue, but she did not sound convinced either. She said she only asked because the same car had been there twice, and the second time she saw Rachel walking the agent around the yard, pointing at the roof and the garage like she was explaining something important. I felt the edge of the counter press into my hand as I leaned against it, the cool surface grounding me in a way the conversation was not. I told Linda it was probably nothing, that Rachel liked to plan ahead, that she was always talking about improvements and repairs, and Linda said she understood, but before she hung up she told me to make sure I knew exactly what was going on, because houses like mine did not usually get measured and photographed unless somebody was thinking about more than new windows. After I set the phone down, I stood there for a long time without moving, looking at the refrigerator door where we still kept old magnets from vacations we took years ago, places Daniel barely remembered now, places my husband used to say we would go back to when we had more time. The card was still on the coffee table in the living room, the white paper easy to see even from the kitchen, and for the first time since Rachel handed it to me, the words on it felt different. Clean the house while we are away. It did not sound like a chore anymore. It sounded like a plan I had not been told about. I walked back into the living room, picked up the card, and held it between my fingers, turning it over slowly like I was looking for something I missed the first time. My husband used to say that when something does not make sense, you should stop assuming it is small, because the things people hide are usually bigger than the things they show. I sat down again in his chair, the leather creaking softly under my weight, and looked around the room one more time. Not the way you look at a place you live in, but the way you look at something you might have to prove belongs to you. Noticing every detail, every mark, every corner, and for the first time since Daniel and Rachel moved in, I realized that if someone was making plans for this house without telling me, then the only mistake I had made was believing I did not need to make plans of my own. I did not call Daniel that day, and I did not call Rachel either, because after Linda's phone call I understood something I should have understood a long time ago, that the truth has a way of showing itself when you stop asking the people who benefit from hiding it. Instead, I went upstairs to the bedroom I had shared with my husband for more than 40 years and opened the top drawer of the dresser, the one where I kept the things I never needed until suddenly I did. Old insurance papers, warranty folders, envelopes with handwriting I recognized, but had not looked at in years. The house was quiet in that heavy way it gets when nobody else is home, every step on the floor sounding louder than it should, every drawer sliding open with a dry wooden sound that reminded me how old this place really was. I pulled out the small metal box from the back of the drawer, the same one my husband used to joke about calling the vault, even though it only held paperwork and spare keys, and I carried it downstairs to the dining table where the light was better. For a moment, I just sat there looking at it without opening it, my hand resting on the lid, remembering the last time the two of us went through those papers together. It had been a few months before he got sick, back when he still insisted on handling everything himself, spreading documents across this same table while I made coffee, and told him he worried too much. He told me then that keeping things in order was not worrying. It was making sure nobody could tell us what belonged to us and what did not. I opened the box slowly, lifting the lid the way you do when you already know what you might find, but you are not sure you are ready to see it. Inside were the same folders I remembered, the house deed, the insurance policy, the mortgage papers we kept even after it was paid off because he said you never throw away proof of what you earned. My fingers moved through the stack one page at a time, the paper slightly yellowed at the edges, the ink still clear, my name printed next to his on almost every line. When I found the deed, I stopped for a moment before pulling it out, the way you hesitate before opening a letter you know could change something. I laid it flat on the table and smoothed it with my hand, reading the names carefully, not once, but twice, then a third time just to be sure I was not seeing what I wanted to see instead of what was really there. The house was still in both our names, mine and my husband's, exactly the way it had been the day we signed for it, with no changes. No additions, no transfer, nothing that said Daniel, nothing that said Rachel, nothing that suggested anyone had the right to make decisions without me. I leaned back in the chair and let out a slow breath I did not realize I had been holding, the tension in my shoulders easing just enough for me to feel how tight it had been all morning. For the first time since Thanksgiving dinner, the card Rachel left on the table did not feel like an order anymore. It felt like a mistake, the kind people make when they believe something belongs to them simply because nobody has corrected them yet. I picked up the deed again, holding the paper at the corner the way my husband used to, and I could almost hear his voice in my head, calm and steady, telling me not to panic, telling me to read everything twice, telling me that the person who keeps the documents usually keeps the power whether anyone realizes it or not. I closed the folder carefully and put it back in the box, but I did not return the box to the drawer. Instead, I carried it into the living room and set it on the table next to the folded card, the two things lying side by side, one written in neat black ink by someone who thought she was giving instructions, the other printed years ago with both our names on it, proof of promises made long before anyone started talking about trips and cleaning schedules. I sat down in my husband's chair again and looked from the card to the metal box and back, and the strange, steady feeling I had felt the night before returned, stronger now, clearer, not anger, not fear, but the quiet understanding that whatever Daniel and Rachel thought was going to happen while they were gone, they had made one very simple mistake, because they assumed I would spend the week cleaning the house, and they never once stopped to consider that I might spend it making sure the house was still mine. I did not sleep much that night, not because I was worried, but because my mind kept going over the same thought again and again, the kind of thought that feels small at first and then slowly grows until it fills the whole room. The house was still mine. That was the part that would not leave my head, not in an excited way, not in a relieved way, but in a calm, steady way that felt almost unfamiliar after so many months of feeling like I was one step behind my own life. The metal box stayed on the table beside the folded card all evening, and every time I walked past it I glanced down at it, just to remind myself that what I had read was real, that the names on that paper had not changed just because someone else started acting like they had. The next morning I woke up before sunrise again, the habit of years refusing to let me sleep late even when there was no one in the house to cook for, no one waiting for coffee, no one asking what the plan for the day was. I made breakfast the same way I always did, one piece of toast, one cup of coffee, sitting at the end of the table with the newspaper folded beside me even though I barely read it anymore. The card was still there, lying next to the metal box, and this time when I looked at it, I did not feel that sharp sting in my chest. Instead, I felt something closer to clarity, the kind you get when you finally understand the rules of a game you did not realize you were playing. If Rachel thought she could leave instructions for me in my own house, then she must have believed the house already belonged to her, or at least that it would soon enough. People do not act that certain unless they think the decision has already been made. I finished my coffee, washed the cup, and stood at the sink for a moment looking out at the backyard, the same yard my husband used to mow every Saturday morning without fail, even when the grass did not really need cutting. He used to say that taking care of a place meant never letting it look like you were about to leave it. That thought stayed with me as I dried my hands and walked back to the table, picking up the metal box and closing the lid firmly this time. If someone had been talking to real estate agents without telling me, then there was only one reason for it, and pretending not to notice was not going to stop anything. I went upstairs and got dressed, not in anything special, just my usual clothes, the same sweater I wore to the grocery store, the same shoes I had worn 100 times before, because whatever I was about to do did not need to look dramatic to matter. The drive to town felt longer than usual, even though I had made it more times than I could count, the familiar streets passing by in that slow, steady way they do when your mind is somewhere else. I kept thinking about the day we signed the papers for the house, the way my husband insisted on reading every line before he picked up the pen, the way he told me never to assume anything when it came to property, because once something is written down, that is what people believe, no matter what anyone says later. The bank parking lot was almost empty when I pulled in, the morning sun just starting to hit the front windows, and for a moment I sat there with my hands on the steering wheel, taking a breath, telling myself that I was not there to start a fight, not there to accuse anyone of anything, just there to make sure I understood exactly where I stood. Inside, the same young man who had helped me once before with a deposit smiled and asked how he could help, and I told him I needed to look at the records for the house, that I wanted to be sure everything was still the way it had always been. He nodded like that was the most normal request in the world and led me to a desk near the back, pulling up the information on his screen while I sat there with my hands folded in my lap, feeling strangely calm, the way you feel when you finally decide to stop guessing and start looking at facts. When he turned the monitor slightly so I could see, the address of the house appeared at the top, followed by the ownership line, and I leaned forward just enough to read it clearly, not once, but twice, the same way my husband used to, making sure every letter was exactly what it should be. My name was still there, exactly where it had always been, and nothing else had been added. I thanked the young man, stood up, and walked out of the bank without saying anything more, the cool air outside hitting my face as I stepped into the parking lot. Sitting in the car again, I rested my hands on the wheel and looked straight ahead for a long moment, the quiet, steady feeling returning stronger than before, because now I knew something Daniel and Rachel did not. Whatever plans they thought they were making while they were away, whatever they believed would be waiting for them when they came back, they had forgotten one very simple thing, and that was that you cannot take a house from someone who still knows exactly how to prove it belongs to her. I drove home from the bank slower than usual, Not because of traffic, but because I kept thinking about how different the world feels when you stop guessing and start knowing. The streets looked the same grocery store on the corner, the same gas station where my husband used to complain about prices every time we filled the tank, the same row of houses with mailboxes that all looked alike. But inside the car, everything felt quieter, steadier, like the noise in my head had finally settled into something clear. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked exactly the way it always had. The front porch clean, the shutters straight, the lawn cut short from the last time Daniel mowed it before they left. But for the first time in months, I did not feel like I was coming back to a place I had to share on someone else's terms. I felt like I was walking into something that still belonged to me, whether anyone else believed it or not. Inside, the air smelled faintly like the coffee I made that morning, and the metal box was still on the table where I left it, the folded card beside it, the two things sitting there like they were part of the same conversation even though they had nothing in common except what they meant. I took off my coat, set my keys down, and stood there for a moment looking at the room the way I had started to look at everything now, not just as a place to live, but as something that needed to be understood completely before anyone else tried to decide its future. Linda's words came back to me then. The way she said she saw the real estate car twice. The way she sounded like she was not sure whether she should have told me. And I realized that if Rachel had been showing the house to someone, then this was not just about cleaning while they were away. This was about making sure I was not in the way when whatever they planned finally happened. I picked up the card again, turning it over in my hand slowly, reading the same neat handwriting, the same calm instructions, and this time I almost smiled, not because it was funny, but because it was so certain, so sure of itself, the kind of certainty people only have when they believe nobody is going to question them. Clean the house while we are away. I set the card back down and opened the metal box again, taking out the folder with the deed and placing it flat on the table the same way I had the night before. The paper felt solid under my hand, heavier than it should have been, like the weight of every year we spent paying for this place was still pressed into it. My name was still there. Nothing had changed. For a long moment I just sat there, thinking about the way my husband used to handle problems, never raising his voice, never rushing, just making sure he understood every part of the situation before he decided what to do next. He always said that the worst mistake you can make is letting someone else think you are not paying attention. I closed the folder carefully and put it back in the box, but instead of putting the box away, I carried it into the study and set it on the desk, the same desk where we used to keep the checkbook and the bills, the place where every important decision in this house had been made for as long as I could remember. I sat down in the chair and looked around the room, at the shelves, at the old photographs, at the small things that had not moved in years, and the more I looked, the more certain I became that the week they were gone was not going to be spent doing what Rachel expected. If someone had been talking to agents, if someone had been measuring windows, if someone had been making plans for this house without telling me, then the smartest thing I could do was not argue, not call, not give them a reason to change their story. The smartest thing I could do was make sure that when they came back, the house they thought they were preparing to take over was not waiting for them the way they imagined. I picked up the phone on the desk and held it for a moment before dialing. The number coming back to me from memory, even though I had not used it in years, the number of the lawyer my husband trusted more than anyone else when it came to papers and signatures and things that could not be undone once they were written. When the line started ringing, I felt that same steady calm settle in my chest again, the kind that comes when you finally understand that being quiet does not mean being weak, and that sometimes the best way to clean a house is not with a broom, but by making sure the people who thought they owned it learn exactly whose name is still on the door. I met with Mr. Howard Blake 2 days later, in the same small office where my husband and I had sat years ago signing papers that felt routine at the time, but suddenly meant more than anything else in my life. The office had not changed much, the same framed certificates on the wall, the same heavy desk, the same faint smell of old folders and coffee that never quite goes away in places where people make decisions they cannot take back. He remembered me the moment I said my name, and the way his expression softened told me he already understood that I was not there for something simple. I handed him the folder without saying much, just told him I wanted to be sure everything was still exactly the way my husband left it, and he nodded the way people do when they know there is more behind the question than the words themselves. He read every page carefully, slower than the clerk at the bank, slower even than my husband used to, and when he finished, He set the papers down and looked at me for a long moment before speaking. He said the house was still legally mine, that nothing had been transferred, nothing had been changed, nothing had been filed that would give anyone else the right to sell it, rent it, or make decisions about it without my permission. I did not realize how tight my hands were until he said that, because the moment the words left his mouth, I felt the tension in my fingers loosen, like I had been holding on to something for months without knowing it. I told him about the real estate agent Linda saw, about the card on the table, about the way things had started to feel like I was living in someone else's plan without being told what it was, and he listened without interrupting, his face calm, his hands folded on the desk the way they had been the day my husband first told him we wanted everything written clearly so there would never be confusion later. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and said something my husband used to say all the time, that problems with family are rarely about the house itself, they are about who believes they have the right to decide what happens to it. He told me that if I wanted to make sure nobody could move forward without me, there were things we could do, simple things, legal things, the kind that do not make noise but make it impossible for anyone to pretend the truth is different. I did not answer right away. I sat there looking at the edge of the desk, at the small scratch in the wood that had probably been there for years, thinking about the card again, the neat handwriting, the calm instructions, the certainty behind them. Clean the house while we are away. I almost laughed when I thought about it now, not because it was funny, but because I finally understood what Rachel expected to find when she came back. A house exactly the way she left it, quiet, ready, waiting for whatever came next. I looked up at Mr. Blake and told him I did not want to fight. I did not want to scare anyone. I just wanted everything written in a way that could not be ignored. He nodded again and turned the papers toward me, pointing to the line where my name already stood, the same line my husband signed beside years ago, and he said the best protection is making sure the truth is clear before someone else tries to change it. When I left the office, the air outside felt colder than it had that morning, the sky gray in that flat winter way that makes everything look sharper, more defined, and as I walked to the car I realized that for the first time since Thanksgiving dinner, I was not thinking about what Daniel and Rachel were doing on their trip. I was thinking about what they would see when they came back. The house looked the same when I pulled into the driveway, the porch, the windows, the yard, everything exactly the way it had always been. And that was the part that made me feel calm, because nothing needed to change on the outside for the truth inside to be completely different. I went in through the front door, set my keys on the hallway table, and looked at the place where the card had been lying days before, the spot still empty now, the wood smooth under my hand as I ran my fingers across it. I walked into the living room and sat down in my husband's chair, the leather creaking softly the way it always had, and I looked around the room slowly, not with doubt anymore, not with confusion, but with the quiet certainty that comes when you finally understand that being patient does not mean giving up. I had not cleaned the house while they were gone, not the way Rachel meant, but I had done exactly what needed to be done, and when I closed my eyes for a moment, I could almost hear my husband's voice again, calm and steady, telling me the same thing he told me the day we bought this place, that as long as I knew what was mine and I did not let anyone convince me otherwise, nobody could walk in, leave a note on the table, and decide my life for me.